Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode here from GuigLit, your #1 channel for all things books, beards and beyond, and all English tips you would ever need. Today we are continuing our exam success series on understanding Macbeth. We're on lesson 18 now, which is the end of the play, Act 5 Part 1. As always, give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends and everybody you know, and don't forget to hit the bell icon for more updates as we go along. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to GuigLit across Twitter, Instagram and TikTok, where we'll find even more content to help you gain English success. So, as always, what can you do with this lesson? Make sure to take notes on this video. We're going to great detail that I couldn't even get to in lessons as much as I can here. To annotate a copy of the text, be sure to make sure we do that alongside it. Make sure you use it as a revision tool. Make sure you use it with classmates or even by yourself. It'd be very, very useful. Make sure to use it for mind maps. Visualize your learning as a really strong way of embedding that knowledge and understanding of a given text. And be sure to list examples as you go. So, today we're looking at Act 5, Part 1 of 2. Next week will be the final video on Macbeth. And some key information as you need to know it. So, Malcolm and his forces are marching towards Dunsinane. He is armed with 10,000 men, gathered from England and around Scotland, who have deserted Macbeth. They're willing and ready to take over from him. Meanwhile, Macbeth still feels fortified and strengthened by the prophecies of the witches. He quite clearly makes sure that the reports of the battle that seem bad so far are not affecting him. Now, this is due to the prophecies, as I say. So those prophecies have strengthened him and make him feel a sense of invincibility against Malcolm's forces. At the same time, Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking. Now, at the time the play was written for and produced for, sleepwalking was a sign of great mental frailty and weakness and a disturbance in one's mental health, as we'd know it now. She's confessing her sins unknowingly to a servant and a doctor. So we begin in Act 5, Scene 1. We're in Dunsinane, an anteroom in the castle, and a doctor asks when was it she last walked. Remember, Lady Macbeth has been sleepwalking, and just as I said earlier, that is a sign of a troubled mind. This is Lady Macbeth's final scene in the entire play, and it's very important for you to understand how she ends the play itself. The gentlewoman then asks and tells the doctor, that since His Majesty Macbeth went into the field and began the battle, notice they've become even more distant through that quote, that they're even more separate, that they have nothing to do with each other anymore. The gentlewoman has noticed how she would unlock her closet, take forth paper, fold it, write upon it, read it, afterwards seal it, and again return to bed. Notice these different verbs of unlock, take forth paper, fold it, write, read, seal it. They're all secretive acts that are reflective of Lady Macbeth's guilty conscience here. And she's doing this all while she's sleepwalking as well, so she's not mindful of what she is doing. The doctor describes how it's a great perturbation in nature, a great disturbance. This is an unnatural action brought on by, doubtless, unnatural deeds. The gentlewoman then says, when he asks what she's been saying, that she will not report after her, and that neither to you nor anyone, having no witness to confirm my speech. The gentlewoman will not repeat what Lady Macbeth has been saying, because Lady Macbeth's words are far too shocking for anyone to hear or even be believed in this case. It's at this point that Lady Macbeth enters for the final time in the play with a taper. Now, a taper is kind of a thin candle that would burn quite quickly and briefly. This reflects her fear of not just the dark, but connotations of the dark, her fear of death and hell and the evil that she has brought upon herself, trying to protect herself from doing so. Now, as she speaks and as she talks, they observe her, and she has light by her, as the gentlewoman says, continually. 'Tis her command. Notice that it's there continually, that adverb, that Lady Macbeth's fear of the dark and its associated meanings are so strong that she will not be enshrouded entirely in the dark. They continue, and the doctor notices how she rubs her hands, to which the gentlewoman adds to and says how she has known her continuing this for a quarter of an hour. The motion of rubbing her hands and this continual action here, demonstrating the kind of stress and strain that Lady Macbeth is feeling at this point, and that she is always trying to rub away the guilt. It's like a physical manifestation of her guilt Notice how sore and coarse her hands would be from doing such a thing for such a long time. And then she begins and she says, "Yet here's a spot." The doctor and a gentlewoman listen to her quite broken and fragmented conversation at this point, to herself. She says, "Out, damn spot, out, I say, hell is murky." Notice her language is broken and fearful, all the while being fixated on this one unalterable spot that she can't erase, she can't clean. The spot is like a manifestation of her guilt and how broken she feels as a result. Continuing here, she says about a soldier and a feared, yet who would have thought the old man to have so much blood in him? Now, in the course of this scene, she is very much calling through and talking through all the different deeds that her and Macbeth have committed together. They comment on the crimes they've committed, on Duncan, on the Macduffs, on Banquo. This phrase here, so much blood in him, and this old man being Duncan. Her trauma is starting to spill out now of this scene, the grisly scene she would have noticed when Duncan's body was seen when she took the daggers back in Act 2. So it's all starting to build up here and all starting to become very much more realistic. Now, the doctor then says if she marks that, if the gentlewoman notices that, Lady Macbeth continues to break apart the aspects of their guilt. Thane of Five had a wife, where is she now? This kind of reference to the murders of Macduff and his Macduff's family, rather. And what will these hands ne'er be clean, ne'er be clean? This idea of her guilt and trauma are inescapable. Lady Macbeth continues and says, "You mar all with this starting." Again, this is a reference at Macbeth's previous trauma, the banquet scene we've seen him do this in. This idea of the fear around that. Now, as we continue, the gentleman says, "Heaven knows what she has known." This horror, what Lady Macbeth is referring and confessing to at this point, very much fearful and afraid of what has come to be brought into the light, as it were. Lady Macbeth continues and says, "All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Oh, oh, oh." Notice there's a lot to unpack in this very little bit here from Lady Macbeth. All the perfumes, how this change is permanent. This little hand, reinforcing a kind of weakness and vulnerability in her. That she's very diminutive and small and frail. Continuing this as well, the final repetition of "oh" shows how even her language is breaking down here, falling apart, that they don't have any sense of continuation or strength in her mental feelings anymore as she did previously. The gentlewoman then says how "I would not have such a heart in my bosom for the dignity of the whole body she can." And the doctor says how "this disease is beyond my practice. Those which have walked in their sleep, who have died holily in their beds, he has known of." Both the attendant and doctor are horrified here by her downfall and what she is confessing to, and the disgust of it all. The doctor is mentioning how it's beyond his practice, emphasising how far gone and destroyed and defeated Lady Macbeth is. He then references how some have died holily in their beds, hinting that her downfall is a religious one more than specifically a physical or medical one. Continuing the scene into Lady Macbeth's final lines, Lady Macbeth says how "I tell you again, Banquo's buried, he cannot come out on his grave." Banquo's buried, this other hint, confession to the murder of Banquo and the death of Banquo, and she's openly revealing these now as the empire of Macbeth is falling apart in Scotland. And then she says there's knocking at the gate. "Come, come, 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 give me your hand. What's done cannot be undone. To bed, to bed, to bed." Her final lines here reference the gate, which is a reference to the gates of hell, as well as the gates at the porter's scene, just as they're about to leave after the murder of Duncan. Has a dual meaning there. And her last lines are ones of doom and loss. Her final six words are a repetition of the pairing of "to bed," showing a metaphor for death and the very end of things, and the destruction that she has brought upon herself, as well as Macbeth, as she leaves. Now, the doctor mentions how "foul whisperings are abroad, unnatural deeds do breed unnatural troubles, infecting minds to their death pillows will discharge their secrets." He says here and laments how corrupted Lady Macbeth has become, an infected mind. It's almost an illness, an incurable illness in her as a result. More needs she the divine than the physician. How she's only religion can save her now, and that her downfall is so acute and so strong that there's nothing he as a doctor could do. It's more in the work of a priest than anyone else. Then his final line from the Doctor is quite telling. He says, God, God forgive us all. Notice God forgive us all. So this idea that all of society is to blame, and that such tyrants and such evildoers are only allowed to do such evil because of the inability of society and the inaction of society. So the Doctor blames the entire society for allowing this to happen at this point, at the scene. We then move on to Act 5, Scene 2, and these scenes start to pick up a lot of pace here. We have a number of smaller scenes with Malcolm's forces advancing to Dunsinane, and this one's a very short one. The character of Menteith, who is one of minor lords who has come to help on Malcolm's advance, says how the English power is near led on by Malcolm, how revenges burn in them, that Malcolm's forces are ready and approaching, and that they are desirous and eager to defeat Macbeth and overthrow him. Then we also see how he's referred to as a tyrant, and Caithness, another minor lord, says, some say he's mad, Macbeth, others that lesser hate him do call it valiant fury. Here Macbeth is seen contrastingly at this point. There's a kind of doomed honour in him. On the one hand, he's seen as a mad tyrant. On the other hand, he's seen with valiant fury, that he's that those who have less of an attachment to him see him as dying, not dying, but ending. His rule is dying in a kind of dishonourable honour, for want of a kind of contradictory term there. He's going down fighting. He won't surrender. He won't be a coward. And then the scene concludes with them commenting, these minor characters of Malcolm forces are entering, how Macbeth's secret murders stick on his hands. This idea of another kind of play on that imagery that Lady Macbeth just used, the blood on the hands. Macbeth's schemes are now public knowledge. They realise the murders of Duncan and Banquo and Macduff's family were all down to him and his regime. And how, like a giant's robe, as well as like a giant's robe, those he commands move only in command, nothing in love, and his power is described as like a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief. Here Macbeth is losing control. He's a false king at this point. We notice the contrast of giant's robe and dwarfish thief here, that he is a king that's not fit to be one in his portrayal, and only those that work for him now work for him surely out of duty and solely out of duty. Then Lennox says to dew the sovereign flower and drown the weeds is their purpose, that they're there to purify and cure Scotland, the nation, of the ills that it has surely felt under his reign. They then march on towards Burnham as the battle is about to take place. Then we go back to Dunsinane, where Macbeth is, and we see him in a real surge of confidence here. Bring me no more reports, let them fly all, till Burnham wood removed to Dunsinane I cannot taint with fear. Notice how he's brimming with a sense of almost hubris, this arrogance. Let them fly all, the people, all these rumours and all the people that have deserted him, and how he cannot taint with fear. It's an impossibility. He then continues and says, the boy Malcolm, he's mocking his enemies here as if they're not fully men, fully grown, fully able to defeat him. And this all strengthened by what the witches have previously told him. So in doing so, then fly full stains. He does not care for those that have left him. He does not need them. And how his mind, the mind that sways and the heart he bears, shall never sag with doubt nor shake with fear. He feels invincible due to these prophecies that he has. Then a servant enters and he says, the devil damn thee, thou cream-faced loon, where goest thou that goose? Where gotst thou that goose? Look, notice those phrases, cream-faced and goose look. The servant has seen Malcolm's forces coming, how huge they are in number, and he's terrified at the sight and scale of Malcolm's forces at this point. And he's mocked. The servant says there is 10,000, to which, even though he says soldiers, Macbeth says geese villain. Notice the way he says geese. Macbeth does not take this threat seriously. The witches have told him he will be king, and no man of woman born can harm him, and that the woods would have to move for him to be toppled. So he does not take this seriously, even despite what the servant sees. He tells the servant to go prick his face, to cut his face, and overred his fear, to smear his face in blood. Thou lily-livered boy. Now with this, and what's important in this point to notice is the fact that he doesn't take it seriously. He says, take thy face hence. He doesn't take the negative reports seriously in any way, shape or form. Tells him to go off and be more confident in their stature and position. The servant exits, And then we see him for a brief moment be private. In a private moment, he reveals private fears. He calls out to Seaton and how he is sick at heart when I behold. And he calls out again to him. Seaton is one of his remaining advisors, one of his few final advisors, and it's a deliberate play on words of Satan. But he also notices how he's sick at heart there. And he says how my way of life has fallen into the sear, the yellow leaf. These words show how he is privately drained and weaker than he is before, though he will not show it to those that remain around him, those few that remain around him. The way of life is fallen in the yellow leaf. Then later on, when Seaton comes in to ask to help, Macbeth asks for his armour and how he will fight till from my bones my flesh be hacked. Notice the brutality here, flesh and hacked, the verb hacked. The violence of this reinforcing Macbeth's warrior mentality, but also his understanding of the brutal realities of war here, how they are very much in a position of being ready to fight, but he will fight to the end regardless of the circumstances. He then tells Seaton to send out more horses, skirt the country round, hang those that talk of fear. Notice that he knows there's symbols here that how his empire's falling, is how he's asking Seaton to have people murdered that would even talk against him now. The whole empire is toppling at this point. He then asks how the doctor's patient is. The patient is Lady Macbeth. How telling is that to an audience, that he only refers to Lady Macbeth as a patient at this point? Notice the cold and impersonal way he refers to her here, and how distant they've become and detached. Where she was once his dearest partner of greatness, she is now just a patient. Could be anyone, so impersonal and informal in that regard. The doctor then says that she isn't sick as she is troubled with thick-coming fancies. This phrase here demonstrating how her illness is a mental, spiritual, deep-rooted one that has to be cured through religion and religion only, and that the work he can do is only minute. Macbeth then says how he simply says cure her of that. Very dismissive tone here from Macbeth. Short, simple sentence, emphasising his disdain for his wife's problems and how little he actually cares. He then tells him to throw physic to the dogs, none of it. Ignorant of his wife's problems, he doesn't wish to be bothered with them anymore. The doctor cannot do that, then he has no need for him and no interest as a result of the situation. The Thanes fly from me. Macbeth is aware of the mass desertion here, and he then says he will not be afraid of death and bane till Burnham Forest come to Dunsinane. The prophecies of the witches are where he finds his strength, despite the realities of what has happened. Then the doctor at the very end here says, were I from Dunsinane away and clear, profit again should hardly draw me here. The doctor would not come back to Dunsinane ever in any way, shape or form at all. Now we go to scene 4, about halfway through Act 5. It's a very, very small scene here with Malcolm. Notice the drum and colours, they are there, they are openly coming along. It says the Wood of Burnham. They are at the Wood of Burnham now, and how Malcolm orders Menteith and the others to hew them down a bough and bear it before them. Thereby shall we shadow the numbers of our host. He orders the woods to be cut down to disguise the numbers, so the trickery and the sophistry of the witch's words are made clear here. The woods will move because the woods are chopped down and moved towards him. Silwood then says the confident tyrant, which is obviously a mention of Macbeth, keeps still in Dunsinane. And Malcolm says none serve him but constrained things whose hearts are absent too. Only the worst of humanity still keep with Macbeth at this point. No one else is around him. He is alone, almost, and deserted, almost certainly. The scene then ends with a few lines from Macduff and Silwood. They've referred to their just censures and towards which advance the war. Malcolm's forces are seen as the force for good, this just, the adjective just, and how they are closing in upon Dunsinane, Macbeth's tainted rule, slowly coming to an end. So that concludes part 1 of Act 5. Thank you as always for tuning in. Be sure to like, share and subscribe the video, and search for GuigLit across all the different social media platforms. Leave us a comment if there's anything I can help with as well. Be more than happy to. And until next time, all the very best, take care, and bye-bye.